open my eyes, sir. I've never used them before.
Understand, first of all, that I'm not a medical doctor. I'm an engineer, and so my part of it was designing the microchip, not interfacing it to the nervous system and this type of thing. But byproducts that came from that were other microchips that began being used in places like Chino prison. Instead of an lesion in the brain, they were using a microchip for sex offenders and child molesters. Now, folks, this was a progression of things that happened. And as it moved along, the chips became more sophisticated, and at one point they determined that we can't use a flat chip that has to be surgically implanted. This won't work. We got into designing cylindrical architecture, got into designing stacked strata and building a cylindrical. But this microchip, very small, fits through an eye of a hypodermic needle. Now, right here in Spokane, or in Sacramento, you have been exposed to this in pets and this type of thing. We've been using it for brands. We've been using it for all kinds of things. There's a group called InfoPet down in Los Angeles that claims they can keep track of 1 billion pets to within 10 feet of where they're at. We went out, we spent $1.5 million doing some research on places to put the microchip. We spent $1.5 million, between 1.2 and $1.5 million, trying to determine where the places on the body were that the temperature changed the most rapidly. The places they came up with were just below the hairline, on the forehead and on the back of the right hand. I think it was kind of interesting because there wasn't an antichrist in that group. There was 100 men involved in it, or actually 101 men and a couple of women involved in the project. There wasn't an antichrist. There wasn't anybody that came in wearing long red underwear and a tail and a pair of horns. Everybody was, they were just guys trying to do a job. We had a lot of freedom in what we were doing, and we were all trying to do the very best we can. And I would like to have you turn with me to Revelation 13, and I'm going to show you some things. The Bible that I had at the time, I read it, and it said in verse 16, it said, "And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their forehead." And I said, "But Lord," he said, "look it up in the Greek." And it's 5480 in the Strong's Concordance in the Greek. And it says, "A scratch, an etching, a stamp, as a badge of servitude, or cut into." It takes you to the word charax, which is to sharpen to a point. The idea of scratching, a stake, a pointed object, pointed into. I believe what John saw as Jesus was giving him the book of Revelation, I believe what he saw was a hypodermic needle, and I'm going to tell you why. Because in the meetings that I have been in, meetings in Luxembourg, meetings in London, meetings at the Sir Francis Drake Hotel in San Francisco with a lot of these people. I've been in 17 of these one world type meetings. The whole idea behind it is identification. And folks, it's not a barcode. You can't contain enough in a barcode. First thing is, nobody would accept a barcode. Who wants that thing out there? But I believe it's the microchip under the skin. And by the way, I'll go into at the last meeting we had this morning, a church that we were in, a man walked up who was a government employee right here in Sacramento and said, "I attended a meeting last week where they said key personnel will receive the microchip." Government personnel, key personnel, and he was in that meeting. God showed me something else. He said, "Take a look at not the numbers 666, but the word for 666. I said, "Lord, I didn't know there was one of those." And there is. It is 5516 in the Strong's Concordance, and it's Circuses-Ep. The 22nd and 14th, an optional letter of the Greek alphabet, intermediate between the 5th and 6th, used as numbers denoting respectively 660 and 6. That takes you to the word stigma. The last part of that word is stigma. Now I want you to listen to this carefully, because it's really, it was difficult to dig this out. It's difficult to share it with you. The word stigma is to stick or to prick a mark incised or punched for recognition of ownership. And so I looked at all of those and I wept for days.
One of the hardest things when you're trying to affect change, the hardest thing is how does that fit in to a cohesive, larger vision that's going to allow you to sell $8 billion, $10 billion of product a year. You've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it.
I was worth about over $1 million when I was 23, and over $10 million when I was 24, and over $100 million when I was 25. And it wasn't that important because I never did it for the money.
1 billion of us own a smartphone, and we know how addicting it can be. One former Google employee says this is no accident. Indeed, it is by design. And he became troubled by the relentless efforts of app developers to keep us glued to the gadgets.
I noticed when I was at Stanford, there was a class called the Persuasive Technology Design class, and there's a whole lab at Stanford that teaches students how to apply persuasive psychology principles into technology to persuade people to use products in a certain way. So it's not about giving you all this freedom, it's about sucking you in to take your time.
So the goal is to keep us on our devices longer. Why?
For any company whose business model is advertising or engagement-based advertising, meaning they care about the amount of time someone spends on the product, they make more money the more time people spend. So the game becomes, how can I throw different persuasive techniques to get people to stay, to spend as long as possible, and to come back tomorrow.
We are delivering today the iPad, the new iMac, the iPod, iPhoto, MacBook Air, iTunes. It's a revolutionary moment.
The documentary is called Screenagers, and in it, Dr. Delaney Rustin explores the complex relationship teenagers have with their screens. Both the pleasures they take in sharing their lives online with their friends, as well as the darker side, those who lose control of their digital habits and spiral into damaging behavior.
When I went to hug him, I could feel the bones in his back, and that was scary.
The film also looks at the latest research about the impact all this screen time has on the brains of young people.
You have a brain that is wired for what in psychology is called seeking behavior, the kind of thing that a Google search gives you. Something new, something stimulating, something different.
The dopamine that's secreted in the brain's pleasure center when we get new bits of information and we look at the screens, that center of the brain is most activated when we're kids and we're teenagers.
So these are little electronic drug delivery devices. I know that's a crude way to put it, but that's what you're saying.
Absolutely. I mean, it's amazing that there's many studies that look at MRI scans of the brain of kids who play a lot of video games, 20 hours or more of video games a week. And when they compared them to people who are addicted to, say, drugs or alcohol, their brain scans are similar.
We know that engagement with social media and our cell phones releases a chemical called dopamine. That's why when you get a text, it feels good. Right? So, we've all had it where you're feeling a little bit down or feeling a bit lonely, and so you send out 10 texts to 10 friends, hi, 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 because it feels good when you get a response, right? Right? It's why we count the likes, it's why we go back 10 times. The trauma for young kids to be unfriended, because we know when you get it, you get a hit of dopamine, which feels good. It's why we like it, it's why we keep going back to it. Dopamine is the exact same chemical that makes us feel good when we smoke, when we drink, and when we gamble. In other words, it's highly, highly addictive. And you have an entire generation that has access to an addictive, numbing chemical called dopamine through social media and cell phones as they're going through the high stress of adolescence. Why is this important? What's happening is because we're allowing unfettered access to these dopamine-producing devices and media, basically it's becoming hardwired, and what we're seeing is as they grow older, too many kids don't know how to form deep, meaningful relationships. And worse, they don't have the coping mechanisms to deal with stress. So when significant stress starts to show up in their lives, they're not turning to a person, they're turning to a device.
Adam Alter, these screens, these phones, these games, are they designed to be addictive?
Yes, I think so. I think companies that are creating content for screens are very sophisticated. Their understanding of human psychology is sophisticated. They work with experts who know more about human psychology and human behavior than anyone else in the world, and they are trying everything they can to ensure that we spend our time and attention with their programs, platforms, and devices. So yes, absolutely. I think this is by design. This is an attention economy. There's a limited amount of attention to go around, and there's a war here, and there are a lot of players, some of them very large, some of them with deep pockets and great resources, and so they're doing everything they can to win this particular attention war. And a lot of them are succeeding, and so there's this arms race where different platforms are building in different features that hook us to a greater extent over time. And more than that, not just the understanding of human behavior, but access to data that shows, for example, you make this particular tweak, people spend an extra 3 minutes a day on your platform. You make this one, you can get an extra 10 minutes a day. So all of that is available to them, which means that they are able to tweak their programs, their platforms, to make them as hard to resist as possible.
I've watched some of these habit-forming technologies at some of these large companies, and I believe you do not think they've entirely been used for good, and I'm hoping you can explain that position.
Yeah, so I mean, my whole life I've always believed in the potential of technology, and through my university experience, through the years when I was working at Google and the search advertising systems there, and you know, what I realized at one point when I was working there is that this thing that we call the internet, this kind of informational environment that we all live and breathe in every day, is sort of the product of kind of three commingling trends. One is the persuasion industry that came to maturation during the 20th century, which drew on advanced knowledge of human psychology to learn how to not just give us information, but shape our behaviors and our attitudes. The other was this new infrastructure we had of measurement, experimentation, message delivery, optimization on the internet, which closed the feedback loop of measurement, so to speak, and enabled the persuasion industry to sort of colonize this new realm. And then when smartphones became widely prevalent, I think what happened was that we sort of became ensconced in this de facto environment of industrialized persuasion. And to me, if technology is for anything, if there's a purpose for it, for these information technologies we use, it's to help us navigate our lives in the ways we want them to go. I felt that, the goals of the technologies I was using every day in this persuasion industry, which all these technologies were just relentlessly competing to capture and exploit my attention, they were optimizing for these lower level metrics, these petty goals, engagement metrics as they're often called. Time spent, time on site, number of clicks, number of views. Nobody has these goals for themselves. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, how much time can I possibly spend on social media today? Does anyone here actually have that goal? I'd love to meet somebody at some point who has this goal and understand their mind. It made me realize that there's a fundamental moral and political problem we have now, that we all live in this technological environment, this attention economy, where all of these products, all of these services are competing to capture and keep and exploit our attention. And when you look at the centralization of the power to persuade people's thoughts and behaviors, Facebook has over 2 billion users. That's more people than the number of people who speak English on planet Earth today. I came to realize that this is the moral and political problem of our time.
I'm Roger. I'm a Facebook addict. You're supposed to say, hi, Roger. Imagine this. In 2006, Facebook is 2 years old. Mark Zuckerberg is 22. I'm 50. One of his people brings him in to see me and says, my boss has an existential problem and he needs somebody who's not conflicted to help him solve it. He walks into my office. I said, dude, I've never met you before. You got to give me 2 minutes to tell you some things. I explained to him that If it hadn't already happened, either Microsoft or Yahoo was going to try to buy the company for $1 billion, and everybody he knew was going to tell him to take the money, and they'd back his next thing, blah, 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 blah. And I said, I thought he'd created the coolest company since Google, and that the fact they had real identity and gave the user control of privacy was going to really matter to adults, and that while at that time he was only doing it with college kids, it was really going to be incredibly valuable to adults who have way less time. And I said, I don't think you should sell the company. What ensued was 5 minutes of dead silence with him pantomiming all of these like thinker poses. And I'm sitting there white knuckling, right? I'm literally dying because 5 minutes of silence with a guy going is the most painful thing on earth. And I'm just not capable of handling it. At the end of the 5 minutes, he goes, you just won't believe this, but everything you said is true. And I have the contract in my bag, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about. So I helped him break the deal. I later introduced him to Cheryl, so the 4 years in between, I was one of his mentors. I was more proud of Facebook than anything I'd ever done. And then at the beginning of the Democratic primary in 2016, I saw some memes being spread that you couldn't explain organically. I know a lot about how Facebook works. I built a band on it. And over the next 6 months, I saw a whole bunch of things. I saw Brexit, where it was really clear that Facebook conveyed an advantage to negative emotional messages over neutral ones. I saw people getting busted for violating the Fair Housing Act using Facebook's advertising tools. And I finally wrote Mark and Cheryl. Well, I wrote an op-ed, and instead of publishing it, I sent it to Mark and Cheryl. And I said, guys, I think there's a systemic problem here. And I gave them 7 examples, only one of which was election-related, because I thought Clinton was going to win, and I didn't want them to dismiss the thing as not an issue if she did. And they treat it like a PR problem, not like a substantive problem. So I spent 4 months trying to persuade them that this was substantive, and it didn't work. And then a few months later, I'm interviewing this dude on Bloomberg. It happened to be Tristan, who had just been on 60 Minutes, and he's talking about brain hacking. And all of a sudden, the piece that I was missing, which was the business model that Facebook created after I left, suddenly I understood what was going on. I understood why it was you have people, on one side who believe the climate is not changing, and people on the other side who believe that contrails are a huge conspiracy or that vaccinations are the end of the world. Roughly a third of the population of America believes things that are demonstrably not true. And, it's not because of Facebook. People have always believed things that are demonstrably not true. But what has happened is Facebook created a business model that essentially made people who believe that kind of stuff more valuable. So it was in their interest to appeal to emotions like fear and anger and to cluster people in tight groups for advertisers. And it turned out that those advertisers could influence the thought processes of the people, implant ideas in their head, make them more extreme over time, and effectively manipulate their thoughts. That's not good. I have to do something about this. So I called him up. I said, you need a wingman? He said, yeah, I do. I wear a suit, not very often. I hadn't worn one in years until we started this back in April. But now I have to wear one a lot because we go visit people in Congress and we visit people in New York who are, shall we say, rather more formal. But what I'm here to say is that these folks are the actual professionals. I'm a person who's here because I happen to be involved with Facebook at a moment in time that gives me real credibility to say, this is the most important thing I've ever done, and it scares the hell out of me. Not because they're bad people, not because they intended to do any of this stuff, but rather because the system got out of control and the profit motive makes it really hard to fix. There are solutions. We could go to a subscription model. There are other solutions. They could open up and let the investigators understand what happened in 2016. They could contact everybody who was touched and say, hey, we're Americans. You may like how the election turned out in 2016, but this next time, everybody and their grandmother's going to do this, and you may not like the outcome. As Americans, the best way to fix this is for us to vote, because voter suppression is the goal of these manipulations, and we can beat it by voting.
My question for you, how much of this, in a way, is about Trump? Because one of the reasons why these arguments are taking off is this underlying sense that the spread of misinformation, the spread of outrage, led to a candidate who was very good at making people very emotional, and was a candidate who not a lot of people in Silicon Valley like. But what's also interesting is that the last time social media was able to really affect a presidential election and help a candidate who really inspired emotion, it was Obama. And so, are we overcorrecting a little bit because of the outrage in Silicon Valley about Trump? Explain how you think about that.
So are we overcorrecting?
In that, well, how much of this do you think ties back to Trump? If Trump had not, clearly the campaign that you've helped start has massive momentum. Had Trump not won, do you think it would have as much momentum? And then secondly, do you think the same forces at play here are the same ones that kind of helped Obama be more of a viral candidate, just in sort of a reverse way? Roger says no based on his facial expression.
I think we agree that it's lookalike models.
Fire away.
There. So the lookalike models were introduced in 2013. So one of the key things that really changed is the introduction of lookalike models. How many people here know what lookalike models are? Okay, very small number of people. I count probably 5-10%. So lookalike models let you say, I have an email list of 100 people believing in a conspiracy theory. How do you do that? You go to one of the conspiracy theory groups on Facebook, you look at the user IDs, and you just download them. Then you pump that list of 100 into Facebook and say, give me 1 million people who look just like that. Did you know you could do that with Facebook? Most people, including many folks in Congress, you wouldn't know. These are new, sophisticated tools, and that was introduced in 2013. And that totally changes the dynamics of persuasion. I think of this as we just invented a new species of persuasion. Every time you open up Facebook, whether it's the content story you see on a news feed, or it's the ad that you see, we think that, the story that shows up at the top is just the latest thing that one of my friends posted. But that's not what actually happens. When you open up that blue F icon, you just activated a supercomputer on the other side of the screen that's trying to play chess against your mind and figure out what's the move I can play 50 million steps ahead of your mind has any clue is coming. That's the perfect thing to show you that will keep you scrolling. The advertising engine is very similar. And so one thing I think about this is that the thing that is changing is we are increasing, you could graph even how powerful and how specific and how targeted and how micro-targeted the persuasion can be. And you can see that power increasing. And we're left with this, human evolution 1.0, prefrontal cortex, not changing. So as a friend of mine likes to say, it's like bringing a knife to a space laser fight. Or just think about Garry Kasparov, It's like playing chess in the 1990s against a computer. First it's kind of fun, and it's kind of difficult, and you just beat it every time, and then it starts making these moves, and you don't understand why it made that move, and 3 moves later it beat you, and you're like, that's interesting. And then Garry Kasparov plays this thing, and then once it beats him, it's just seeing way more moves ahead on the chessboard than all of humanity for all time, that point onward in the future. So the important part to realize here is that we have exponential tech combined with persuasion, and we're not changing this. And so the only way to solve this problem is to not have adversarial exponential tech. You don't want an AI in the opposite side of the table pointed at your brain or children's brains, trying to say, how do I keep you hooked? Or how do I get you the perfect targeted message? And I think that's the framing that encapsulates fake news, perfect political advertising, Cambridge Analytica, addiction. This is the essence of the problem.
What if I tell you, in the future, you might not even have to hold your phone in your hand. If you had the choice, would you implant your smartphone into your head? Let us do a thought experiment and try to imagine what it would be like if we lived in a world where this would be possible. In that world, you could access all the functions of your phone using your thoughts. Everything that you usually see on the screen would be displayed into your visual space. Sitting here and listening to me, you can look up who was this guy called Elon Musk again, just by thinking about him. The answer, including a nice picture of Mr. Musk, would instantly be displayed in front of you. With a quick thought command, you can share what you see and hear with a friend in Hong Kong, who can participate as if he would be here with us. Or, if you happen to not like the talk at all, you can have a thought conversation with your neighbor about what you had for lunch. None of this would require any effort. It would feel as natural and intuitive as thinking is. Does that sound great? Or terrible? Or maybe not so different from what we do today? Today, tech companies and scientists all around the world work on the development of technologies that cross a new frontier, the frontier of our skin. It is very likely that during our lifetime, some of us are going to integrate some technological device into our heads.